First question from Steve. I experience smudging, scuffing on prints when printing during periods of low humidity and/or temperature. Are some Moab papers more or less susceptible to this issue? He mostly uses Entrada.
Yeah, so humidity, especially in the winter, can be a real challenge. If it's below 35 or 40% in your home office space, that's when you would probably start to notice things getting a little different. And that's just because there's so little moisture in the paper that when the ink hits it, either the paper absorbs all of the fluid before the ink particles have a chance to really bond into the surface of the paper, or the paper swells because it's gotten moisture on it, other things like that. So if you can, you want to try to print in the, 35-40% humidity and up to 60-65. Sort of 40 to 60 is the sweet spot. And I'm going to guess that your Entrada is a little more susceptible to this because it is a matte paper. So if the ink carrier fluid doesn't stick around long enough to bond those pigment particles into the paper coating, they're just going to sit on top and they're going to be more vulnerable. So typically a satin or a glossy paper like the Baryta might do a little better, but then the other challenge you have in really low humidity is an RC paper or a Baryta or something like that will actually have more surface swelling when it gets hit by the ink if the paper itself is also really dry. So your best bet is to try to raise the humidity in the area when you're printing. If it's a small room and you can just put a humidifier in it, keep your paper in there in your printer, try to get it up to 35-40%. I know I've talked to some customers in the Northeast in the winter that their house is in the single digits, and that really causes significant issues with printing. But hopefully you're closer to normal and you can just adjust a little bit.
Ralph is printing on an Epson Stylus Pro 3880. I turned it on and it failed to recognize the ink cartridges. Turned it off and on again, and all was well, except now I'm getting a green tint on both color and black and white prints. He reloaded the profile on the Moab paper that he's using, and it did not correct the problem. Any help would be appreciated.
Yeah, it's likely not the profile. There's probably some software gremlin somewhere along the process. The quickest way to check and see, is there an issue with my profile or is it somewhere else, is to do a soft proof. And then if that color shift shows up in your soft proof on your screen, that's profile related. If you don't see the color shift on the screen, then it's something else between the program you're printing with, the print driver, the operating system, and getting that data out to the printer. We've definitely had some challenges with the latest versions of the Mac operating system and to a lesser degree Windows and Adobe, and how colors get a little translated. So you have to look back and, did you do an operating system update? Did you do a software update for your imaging application? Is there a new version of the print driver you can download? Do you have another program you can print from? Just kind of go down a little troubleshooting steps there to try to isolate where the problem lies. And I mean, if you're fortunate and you have a second computer, then try that as well, because sometimes that will be a temporary workaround. And it's one of those things that you'll get it all figured out. You'll go really well for however long, months, years, and then again, you'll have another update and you'll have to do that kind of troubleshooting ladder again to figure out what went wrong.
How do you determine most easily which paper you are printing on might need a wider platen setting, and how do you do that with a Canon or Epson printer?
Yeah, that's a little tougher. So to some degree, the platen gap is determined by the media setting. So if we have a paper that we recommend a fine art media setting for, typically Entrada 300, the Somerset Museum rag, that sort of thing, it will in the media setting automatically set the platen a little wider. So I guess the rule of thumb would be, if it's a 300 GSM paper, if it's a 300 GSM cotton paper, that's when you might want to adjust the platen gap a little wider. So the Juniper is one example where that can be a benefit, because the media setting is typically luster on Epson or Pro Platinum on Canon, and that does not default to a wide platen gap. or if you're using the Entrada 300 and you're using the sheet feeder profile. So for Epson, that would be ultra premium matte, and for Canon, matte photo paper. Again, those don't have a wide platen gap. So for the Canon driver, there's a selection in most of them now that says print head height, and you can set that to avoid abrasions. For the Epson, it's going to depend on what generation of printer you have. So the 3880 and then the P600, P800, you can adjust the platen gap in just the print driver. So usually it says standard and wide, or standard, wider, and widest. It depends on your model. For the P700, P900, they've removed that, and the only way to adjust the platen gap is to go into the new media installer, Epson media installer, duplicate the media setting, set the wider platen gap in there, and save it to the printer. So it's a more complicated process now than it used to be, but I've also heard that those printers do a little better job of auto sensing. So based on your printer model, it's going to change how you have to do it. And you would want to do it for typically the 300 GSM cotton papers. And because GSM is a measure of mass and not of thickness, like the exhibition luster at 300 GSM is half the thickness of the Juniper. So don't go just by the GSM number, you have to go by the paper thickness. So if you look on our website, or if you have a swatch book, in here it'll say, for instance, the Entrada Rag Coldpress is 18 mil. The Juniper Baryta is 16 mil. So those are the ones that are a little thicker. If we look at the exhibition luster, that's only 11 mil. So it's a much thinner paper than the cotton-based papers.
And to
Hopefully
go
that's
along with that, he's
concise
using
enough.
the P900 and the P700, if that makes any difference.
It
And
does. So
someone
with
is asking if you could just explain maybe what the platinum gap is.
Oh, so that's the platen, P-L-A-T-E-N, platen gap, not the platinum gap, but that makes sense. So the platen gap is the difference between what they call the platen, which is the bottom of the inside of the printer where the paper runs over. The print head runs above the platen. So the platen gap is the distance between the print head and either the surface of the paper or the bottom of the platen. I don't know what the measurement is, but it just means that you can incrementally move the print head to be a little farther away from the paper, which helps to prevent head strikes, other things like that. If you go too far away, you can end up slightly reducing sharpness, but you really have to over exaggerate that platen gap to have any negative effects. So to go back to Cliff, on your P700, P900, you'll have to download the Epson media installer and then find the media setting. So if you're using, say, the Juniper, the media setting will be Premium Luster or Premium Luster 260. You'll have to select that in the media installer software, duplicate it, hit the edit, and then you can change that platen gap. You can save it with a custom name. So you can call it Juniper Baryta as a media setting. Save that to your printer, and then when you're printing, use the Juniper Baryta media setting that you created instead of the ultra premium luster, based on the same thing. So you're going to get the same color, just your custom media setting will have a wider platen gap. And there should be some good tutorials out there about how to use media installer if you haven't gone down that road before.
Bob is asking, when printing black and white with Canon PRO-100, if I check the box for black and white, do I set the paper type to what I'm using, or do I set it to printer managed color?
All right, so on the Pro-100, if you're using the little checkbox in the driver that says black and white photo print, then you would set your color management to managed by printer because you want it to do the black and white conversion. You would still use our recommended media setting based on your Moab paper. So you're still going to tell it matte photo paper, other fine art, pro platinum, whatever we recommend, but for the black and white setting in the driver, yes, you will say printer manages colors.
James makes a lot of black and white prints on Moab Entrada Rag Bright 300 using a Canon PRO-1000 printer, raising the brightness and contrast only slightly for consistently successful results. However, my color printing results on this paper are spotty. Color prints often too dark, and when I raise the brightness, there is a lack of deep blacks or the image appears a bit washed out. Any suggestion when printing from Lightroom, or do you recommend a different Moab paper that is more on the matte side that you might suggest? He is using the Moab paper profile.
So the first question I always ask when anyone says their prints are coming out a little dark, so you're saying you raise the brightness, I'm guessing your prints are coming a little dark, is have you calibrated your monitor? And when you did that, did you set it to a brightness between 120 and 160 to better match the brightness of properly illuminated paper? So every year we get brighter monitors, brighter phone screens, brighter everything. Well, we can't make the paper any brighter. So you have to consistently keep dimming your monitor or your laptop screen. So if you have set your brightness accurately with a monitor calibrator, then the second thing is make sure you're using a consistent light source to evaluate your prints and not just a dim overhead light or a dim lamp or something like that, because then again, you're not getting enough illumination. If you're used to printing on a glossy or a satin paper, so the Slickrock Pearl, the Juniper, the Exhibition Luster, and then you go to Entrada, you will see a little difference in the blacks because a matte paper is not going to appear quite with the same richness as a photo black paper because the shiny surface reflects more light. So that could be a part of it. You should still get deep blacks in your prints on Entrada. Again, they just won't be quite to the level of a satin paper. They'll be close, but hopefully one of those applies to where you're at and you can get it remedied.
Just waiting for some more questions to come in. Evan, is there anything new that we have uploaded to our website that people should know about? We did redo our website last year, so it may look a little bit different to some people. But any new profiles that anyone should know about?
Well, the big difference is that over the winter we did redo the ICC download page. So in the past, it was individual profiles per printer. We had a lot of new browsers trying to block those for downloads because they're not universally common file settings. So what we've done now is when you go to our download page, each printer has a zip file that contains all of the Moab profiles for that printer, and then also a PDF with all of the media settings. So hopefully that helps to ease some confusion about, first of all, about what media setting do I use with my Moab paper, because you used to always have to go back to the website to reference that. And then now you get all those profiles downloaded at once. So you can choose to install all of them or just the papers you're using. But I think so far, I think it's been a good solution to a challenge that we've had for a while.
So Barry's asking, why might I print from Photoshop instead of Lightroom on a new Mac on the Sonoma 14 where he is having some profile issues?
Yeah, this is a challenge that we've run into right now with Sonoma. So that's the Mac OS version that came out in October. It seems to be a little hit and miss on color management, which is frustrating because Apple was good for a long time, and now they've kind of, I think, forgotten about their printing customers. You can print from Photoshop or Lightroom. They both use the Adobe color management module. They both kind of have the same processes in the background. So if you're having issues from either Photoshop or Lightroom, generally changing between the two of them is not going to make a difference in your output. You could try sizing your file, getting it prepped, and then you could open it in preview and print from preview. The steps are a little different, but you still have access to the profiles and the media settings and all that sort of thing. And then also just double check that when you installed a new printer driver and that your printer didn't get converted to AirPrint, because Sonoma tries very hard to use the Apple AirPrint driver for every printer that it encounters, and that strips away your ability for media settings, color settings, all sorts of things. So you definitely don't want to use AirPrint if you're trying to print photos. If all else fails and you're stuck with Sonoma and you just can't get it to print, if you're using a Canon, you can use Canon's professional print and layout because that bypasses Apple and Adobe color management. If you're on an Epson doesn't right now make a software that takes care of that, but there's a utility out there called Image Print. It is, I think, about $400 for the application, but again, that's a rip, and that handles all of its color management and everything else. And we've tested here, I know we've tested professional print and layout on Sonoma, and we've used Image Print on OS 13. I forget the name of it, but both of those have worked when we had problems with Photoshop and Lightroom. Sadly, it's kind of an evolving issue. So as I always recommend, if you don't have to upgrade your operating system, don't, because there will always be unintended consequences at some point. So if you're on macOS 12 or 13 and your prints are working, if you can avoid upgrading or updating, because it will probably only bring you some color challenges.
I'm experiencing roll paper loading issues in an Epson P900. All of a sudden, the printer either won't catch the paper, it gets stuck in the load paper message, or says that there's a paper jam. I've noticed a small dent on the left edge after retracting the paper when I load it. Any advice is appreciated.
Yeah, so all of the Epson printers, in my experience, if you experience a couple of paper load failures, you really have to power them off and then turn them back on. It seems like they error a couple of times, then they can't recover unless you power cycle it. If you're loading roll paper, double check to make sure that the leading edge of the roll is as square as it can be. Sometimes, especially when you're starting out, you might get a roll that's cut a little crooked, and the printer won't like that. I think Melissa wrote that there's a small dent on the left edge after you retract the paper. If you can, put a clean cut on that, and just, I haven't loaded roll paper in the 900. I haven't put the roll paper adapter on yet. I need to. But as it's loading in, if you can just apply some real gentle pressure to just keep that sheet moving forward, that might help. Again, make sure it's square, make sure the paper is tight on the roll core, but hopefully one of those will work it out. But again, if you're having load issues, power cycle that printer after a couple of misfeeds, and that may make a difference.
Great. I bought the Moab Entrada Coldpress 17 by 75 inch roll and cut to 25 sheets. The remaining paper is rolled very tight and curled. Any attempt to hold paper in the bathroom after a shower to moisten the paper, any attempt to hold paper in the bathroom, will it help the paper lie flat?
So with any curled paper, the best way to flatten it out is to back roll it. So if you have a sheet, let's have a card here. So if you have a sheet that's come off the roll that's curled, you want to put it on the table, curled side up. And then if you have a shipping tube, an old roll paper core, something that's a good 3 inches in diameter, you're going to set that at the one edge and then just kind of roll the paper around that tube and hold it for 5 to 10 seconds. You can do a smaller diameter. Just the smaller the diameter of the tube, the less time you're going to want it rolled up so it doesn't then spiral the paper the other way. But I know people have asked over the years, should I iron it? Should I put a sandbag on it? Should I spritz it with a water bottle? None of those things are generally going to flatten it out very well. And you can also cause issues with the coating if you're getting it wet or if you're getting it hot or that sort of thing. So back rolling any sheet is always advised. If you're doing a fair amount of this, there's a product out there called the D-roller. IT Supplies carries it. When we have one here, it's not inexpensive, but it does a very quick job of flattening out any roll paper, even the stuff that's close to the core, and is quick and efficient. So back rolling is absolutely the way to go to flatten out any roll paper.
So why do some photo printers have minimum paper size limitations?
Well, I'm curious to know what printer you're thinking of specifically, but all desktop printers, like the two behind me, typically those will go 4x6 up to whatever the size of the platen is. So 13-inch, 17-inch if it's a P900 or a Canon PRO-1000. For roll printers, 24 inches and larger, typically the minimum sheet size for those is 8.5, 11. And that's just because of the scale of the machine. The distance between where you load a sheet and where the print head is, the size of the print head, everything else, they can't physically accommodate a smaller sheet because they're not designed for that. So typically, any desktop printer is going to be all your normal cut sheet sizes, whereas a roll printer or a commercial 17-inch printer like the Epson P900, that has the same 8x10 minimum sheet because it's designed for speed and volume, not small desktop printing.
On configuration window, paper thickness setting, what numbers work there?
Steve, you're going to have to tell me what printer you have because I don't know. P800, paper thickness. Oh, so in the Epson driver, again, this is separating out because we have P600, P800, 3880, I believe is the same way. There are two sets of settings. There's a setting that says paper thickness in millimeters, and then there's the platen gap that we've been talking about. So it was explained to me that paper thickness does not change the print head height. It has some influence on when the ink is released as the head moves across the paper. So you should be able to leave the paper thickness setting alone, but if you need to make something wider, change the platen gap. I have not been able to see a difference if I change the paper thickness number in terms of how the print looks. Whether it was 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, it didn't seem to make a difference. Whereas changing that platen gap will help you out with any head strikes or anything else like that that you're encountering.
And someone is asking where the Moab swatchbook is available. It is available on our website to order under moabpaper.com/sample-boxes. But feel free to send me an email, page@legionpaper.com, and we will get one out to you. And I will also type that out to you. Are there types of photos you would recommend for types of
Papers.
I think types of papers you would recommend for types of photos, for example, landscape, portrait, or etc.
To a point, yes, but then of course it's all about how the paper presents your image. So what we have here is with inkjet printing, we have such a wider variety of papers than we ever had in more traditional photography printing. So typically I would say, if you're doing night sky photography, the Slickrock Pearl is a fantastic option because it gives it sort of that look of the night sky. You have deep colors, you have some reflectivity, the stars kind of twinkle. But you may also put that on a matte paper for a different effect. So we had a client that had an aurora borealis photo, and it looked fantastic on the Juniper, and it also held up really well on the Entrada, but it really changes the feeling of the image. So my advice is always, if you're looking to tinker around, get the Moab sample box. That's 2 sheets of all the papers, and print 1 or 2 images that are the same on each paper, and it will immediately jump out to you how that image changes, how different aspects of the paper stand out. And at that point, it becomes personal preference. What are you trying to say to the viewer? Because you can say a lot about the time, the feeling, how they engage with the image just by changing the paper that it's on. But in terms of typically landscapes, I really like the Juniper Baryta, and then I like the Entrada, typically the natural or the cold press. If you have a subject with texture, trees, rocks, even kind of wheat fields, things like that, the texture in the paper can really almost give a 3-dimensional look to the print, which is really nice. For portraits, it can be kind of the same. Textured paper, you have to see how is that going to affect the way the skin looks, but the Exhibition Luster, the Juniper, both great for portraits because they hold those darker shadow tones you might see in hair or in darker clothing. And they're a very sharp paper, so you're not gonna sacrifice anything in eyelashes or other fine details in that portrait. But yeah, get the sample box, give it a shot, and see what speaks to your work and what you have in mind.
What is the difference between Slickrock Silver and Slickrock Pearl?
So the Pearl is a white based metallic. So from a distance, it looks kind of like just a regular glossy paper. I don't have a sample of it. The silver was made to mimic printing on metal. So the silver is a silver-based paper. It's a kind of a medium gray. So the biggest difference between the two when you print is the silver is very reflective, but it does darken your image a little bit because there's no white in the paper. So the Pearl is a nice all-around for any subject metallic. The silver, I tended to not recommend printing, say, a night sky on it, because when you put a lot of ink on the silver, it would negate the reflective surface underneath and look a little flat. The Pearl doesn't tend to do that. So the silver was great for underwater photographers. Absolutely loved it because it looks like an underwater image. We also saw people print portraits on it and all sorts of things. Obviously, automotive, boats, anything with chrome or speed or whatever else worked really well on that paper too, because that was the look of it. But yeah, basically one is a silver base, one is a white base.
Bob would like to know, would the cold press give good results with a Pro-100?
It will be pretty good. It will perform the same as the Entrada Bright or the Entrada Natural. And why he's asking is on matte or cotton rag papers, the Pro-100 uses dye ink. It's not quite as sharp as a pigment ink printer. It's very close, but yes, all the coatings on all of our papers are designed for both dye and pigment ink. So you should see good results on the Pro-100 with the cold press.
Someone asked, is there a book or such that lists the recommended papers for different uses? And yes, we did a YouTube video on the different papers, but there's also a guide to Moab papers that one of our Moab masters created, Les Picker. It's really great. I will put a link in the chat so anyone can use that. Is there anything similar to Slickrock?
So I'm guessing you're asking about the Slickrock Silver. And to my knowledge, no, we were the only company that had a silver-based metallic, which was...
Quick follow-up to the macOS 14, the Sonoma ICC profile issues. He had his Canon PRO-300 printing perfectly against a profiled monitor before the Mac 13, but now cannot seem to get Photoshop or Lightroom classwork to print correctly with any consistency. Is there anything that Moab can do to work with Apple, Adobe, Canon, etc., to get these working correctly again?
In this moment, unfortunately, no. The photographer user base is not a big portion of what drives their revenue, so we don't get as much love, I think, as we used to. But the easy answer to that is if you're using the Canon PRO-300, download professional print and layout from the Canon site. It's free. It's a RIP utility. Do your post-production in Photoshop or Lightroom, export that image as a TIFF file in the Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB color space, open it in professional print and layout, print it from there, and you should be back to the accuracy that you're used to, because again, that bypasses any Adobe or Apple color management. And in a lot of cases, these are widely reported issues. It's not high on the list of bugs for them to fix.
We do have one more question we're going to get to. And how does your Baryta paper perform in terms of long-term archive qualities?
So right now, we have not submitted papers for longevity testing, and there's kind of two reasons for that. Number one, the tests are extremely expensive, and you can't just necessarily do them with one ink set, because the longevity of a print is far more dependent on the longevity of the inks than the longevity of the papers. So all of our papers are acid-free, pH neutral. They're all archival. So the paper should last a very long time. And your longest lasting papers are going to be the OBA-free cotton papers. So Entrada Rag Natural Coldpress, Entrada Rag Natural, Juniper Baryta. And that's not to say things with OBAs, they're going to last just as long, just over a long period of time. The OBAs are going to not be as effective. So the paper base will become just a little bit warmer in tone. But what you want to look at, if you're looking for print longevity, you want to look at the numbers the manufacturers release for their inks. So Epson, Canon, to some degree, still HP. What are the longevity numbers for their inks? And that's going to really drive your longevity in your prints.
Great.
But the Juniper Baryta, again, it's gonna fare very well. It's an OBA-free, 100% cotton base, and the barium sulfate configuration of the coating has been around, since the 1960s, 1970s air-dried darkroom fiber papers. So it's a really well-known chemical compound that we've used in printing for 60 odd years now.